his benefit.
Où est le bureau de change? Where do I cash my benefit check?
This man's still fighting his case, and now he's taking the new British government to the European Court.
Je suis un citoyen de l'Europe. Give me benefits, or I'll take you to the European Court.
They're known as benefit tourists. We're told they come from other parts of Europe seeking a better life on benefit in Britain. But the E-Files has learnt that a test set up to stop them is trapping thousands of British nationals whose only crime is to have lived and worked in another European Union country.
18 000, mais il faut que
Robin Swadling used to work here in Paris. When he lost his job and found he didn't qualify for help in France, he came home to Britain. But his local social security office turned him away. They classed him as a benefit tourist.
Well, I'm not a benefit tourist. I'm just a British subject who thought that there was the provision for freedom of movement nowadays, so you could go and work anywhere within the European Union, even outside the United Kingdom, and if you came back to your homeland, you wouldn't get punished for it.
Travelling around Europe to work is supposed to be just the same as working within Britain. But Robin found out the hard way that you can't come back and get help if things go wrong. He'd paid taxes in Britain and always called Britain his home, but that wasn't enough. The government wanted to know if he had property here, owned a bank account here. He had to sit the habitual residence test.
There are too many vague notions and far too much discretion left up to local officials deciding on whether the test applies or not, or people pass the test or not. How do we define a significant period of time? How do we define a settled intent to remain here in the United Kingdom? These things need to be pinned down. The regulations need to be clarified.
Well, I was born in the United Kingdom. I'm a British subject. My family all live in the United Kingdom. I've paid tax and national insurance in the United Kingdom. And then when I came back from France, I was denied any benefit for 6 months. So the safety net that I thought was there for people purely and simply in my situation wasn't.
And Robin's not an isolated case.
Well, last year there were about 9,000 UK citizens who failed the test, and they've got a variety of situations. Some have been working abroad, some have come back to this country because of misfortune, maybe ill health, bereavement, relationship breakdown is quite common. Also young people who've been taken abroad by their parents, who've perhaps been working abroad and come back to this country as young people to set themselves up and find work here. And although the numbers overall may seem quite small, the effect on the individuals affected can be devastating.
Michelle Fairhurst is heading home from her new job at a travel agency. Home is Hindley, just outside Manchester, after 4 years working in Spain as a holiday rep. She's trying to get back on her feet after the government here refused to help her. She's another victim of the habitual residence test.
I'm a British citizen. I possess a British passport. Whilst I was overseas, I worked for a British company. My salary was paid into a British bank account, therefore contributing to the government via my national insurance contributions and my tax. As a UK national, I thought that by returning to my country of origin, I would at least get some aid to restart my life here. But it didn't happen like that at all.
Okay, these are some of my colleagues.
Michelle doesn't regret working abroad, but she feels penalised for doing so. She even tried to transfer any Spanish benefit she was owed over to Britain, but still she got nothing. Her savings quickly ran out, and all because she'd worked elsewhere in Europe.
I was absolutely mortified, devastated, furious that I did take the advice that was being given out years ago. We are now part of the European community. Use it to your advantage. Use this to further your career. Gain experience working overseas. Get on your bike and do it. And that's exactly what I did. In the end, it didn't do me any good whatsoever with regards to trying to restart my life back in the United Kingdom.
As an issue, it goes right to the heart of the freedom of individuals to move and to live and work wherever they like within the European Union. That's a right that is enshrined in the European treaties. But I'm afraid the arrangements that exist for the recognition of social security benefits between the member states are such a mess that we have a whole range of barriers. The habitual residency test is a classic example of such a barrier.
Europe has a single market with no single set of rules for the people within it. Brits crossing the Channel to work abroad in Europe get the same rights as workers in the country they move to. But if you lose your job or give up work to have children, those rights immediately stop. That means no right to benefit and no right to help. There's one rule in Europe for people with a job and another rule for those without. The rules appear to penalise UK nationals who've been working abroad.
400 francs within pounds, please.
In a test case, Robin is challenging the government at the European Court of Justice.
When things go wrong, your initial reaction is to go home. And that's what I did.
Right, you have £35 and 24 pence, sir.
The safety net that I'd thought would be there wasn't.
24 pence in your receipt.
Thanks very much.
The European Court's ruling is expected early next year. For British nationals returning home from another EU country, the results will decide whether they qualify for help or are left to fend for themselves, as thousands are having to now. The e-Files wanted to ask the government why so many British nationals are being turned away from help just when they need it most. But the Department of Social Security declined our invitation to be interviewed. In a statement, they told us the habitual residence test is currently under review, and they believe it's perfectly in line with European law.
We do need to remember that people have obligations to society, not just rights. You don't have the right to go around and decide where you're going to live if you're going to impose a cost on the state. And you do have an obligation to look after yourself and to make inquiries. I mean, what I ask myself is, in some of these cases, if people have fallen between the rules, so to speak, did they not think of inquiring before they set off on this voyage of discovery?
We've spoken to British nationals who are suffering as a direct result of the test. How can that be justified?
They're suffering because of anomalies within the European regulations. The way the system works, there are holes in the system. But it's not the job of the British government to patch up every hole in European social legislation.
Now in South Wales, Robin swapped the streets of Paris for the Welsh valleys. He wants to prove that the habitual residence test isn't the way to plug the holes in Europe's social security arrangements. It's a test still forcing people like him into hardship.
You feel at times a bit like a pariah. You feel as though you have no rights whatsoever, totally excluded from society. You feel very much like an alien in your own country because the administration of that country treats you like an immigrant.
If I had come into this country as a refugee or been granted exceptional leave to stay in this country, then I would have been entitled to gain or to have aid or help from the government. But because I was a UK national, I did not qualify. And it was just incomprehensible.
They are UK citizens, they've often got family and friends here and roots here. And all they need is benefit to get them back up on their feet and running again and back into work.
I do not accept that there is an automatic right to live at public expense. There is also an obligation to think out the consequences of the actions before you came back in the first place.
Robin's now building a new life for himself in South Wales. As the organist at St Peter's Church in Blynavan, he's very much part of the local community, but he still feels like an outcast. And unless the habitual residence test is changed, thousands more Britons will fall into hardship when they come home.